So, ladies and gentlemen, I first learned how to play when I was 6 years old. My elder siblings were playing chess, and I went to my mother and pestered her to teach me. And pretty soon they saw that I was, more interested in the game than they expected a 6-year-old to be. So they put me in a chess club, and along came my first chess tournament, where I promptly lost the first 3 games. So by the end, I was paired at the bottom. And during the 4th round, I was paired with someone who, as it turned out, wasn't going to turn up. So I sat there impatiently waiting, because after an hour, you get the point by forfeit. And after 45 minutes, I started looking excitedly at the time, counting down till the moment when I could have my first point. And the point duly arrived, and I was so proud when I went back home. I think it's hard to imagine a title which has given me as much joy as this point, but that's the way you are when you're very young. After that, it was pretty much playing tournaments as often as possible and steadily improving myself, rising in in the ranking and so on. I had a couple of important years. In 82 and 83, I had some breakthrough years. And I went from being a club player to number 4 in the country in the space of about 8 or 9 months. Plus, I had won the national junior and the national sub-junior, so I got to represent India and those things. So a lot of doors opened for me suddenly. And then we were on to the first important title in my life, the Grandmaster title. That was something I started looking for in 1985. And I spent 2 years chasing. Basically, the way you make the title is to have attain certain performances twice or thrice to add up to 24 games. So I spent the whole of 1985 and 86 chasing Grandmaster norms, but didn't make it. Then in early 87, I actually had to stop and get back to school to finish my +2 exams. So for 3 months, there was no chess, and I was actually relieved to stop because it'd been quite frustrating, keeping on missing my Grandmaster title. So I was actually quite relieved to stop and go back to school and spend a couple of months doing something completely different. And I think the other boys couldn't understand why someone was so enthusiastic about studies. But anyway, I finished my exams. And right afterwards, I found that I started coming very close. I mean, I attained some important goals at that point. And in July 87, I won the World Junior Championship, followed by completing the Grandmaster title in December that year. So by the end of 1987, I'd become a Grandmaster. And actually, I think this was one important moment. My school break was probably a very good thing, because I had been chasing something for so long, and in a slightly mechanical way. You work, then you don't get it, so you work for the next tournament, and I'd become sort of stale. And these 3 months away from the game actually allowed me to regain some enthusiasm and, something that you can't define very easily, but I'm sure you know the feeling. You do something for a couple of weeks, and then you come back to whatever you do, and the same problem suddenly looks solvable. So that was very nice. But after I became a Grandmaster, I had a new problem. You see, for many years, I had no problems with goals in life. When I arrived at a tournament, I knew how many points I needed to make to get a Grandmaster result. And that was my target in that tournament. Very easy. However, since a Grandmaster title once given is never taken away, after I became a Grandmaster, suddenly I would go to a tournament and not have any real target. I mean, I would tell myself I should be approximately there, but that's different from having a well-defined goal. And in fact, for the first 6 months, I had a big slump. Later on, many other Grandmasters told me that this is a common syndrome of getting the title, that the first thing you do is you go off the rails for a few months. And then you understand that the Grandmaster title isn't the end of the world. You actually have new things to do and so on. So after about 6 or 7 months, my results slowly stabilized and started to pick up again. And I was on to the next goal, which was to become a candidate for the world title. But that wasn't possible right away. I would need to wait till 1990 to start qualifying in the cycle again. So I just traveled the world, played tournaments. Because I was Grandmaster, I was getting good invitations to nice events and so on. So also just enjoying life and getting to travel and so on, which when you're 18 and 19 isn't too bad. So when I got to 1990, suddenly things actually started to fall in place. I qualified for the candidates at the first attempt. Then, I mean, some dramatic last round and stuff, but still, basically, things were going very smoothly. Then I qualified for some important top tournaments. And I even beat Karpov and Kasparov for the first time around that period. And then something funny started to happen, which is the whole of 1990, most top players would say how talented I was and what an interesting player I was, and I had a great future. And then suddenly, after I beat Karpov and Kasparov, they started giving interviews about how I was actually sort of a coffee house player, and I had some serious deficiencies, and I wouldn't progress that easily. Which is surprising, because my results are actually picked up in this period. And then someone explained to me, probably when you're not a threat, it's much easier to be complimentary. And if you actually sort of don't perform to script, then it gets a bit uncomfortable. So, which was a nice perspective to have, and I took this as a kind of perverse compliment. Then I actually went through several cycles of the World Championship before I finally won it in the year 2000. And I won that year very, very smoothly. In fact, I think my performance was one of the best. I didn't need a single tiebreak except one. And the irony is, this one tiebreak, I was very, very close to losing. And my opponent actually deserved to win. So even in your best tournament, sometimes you need a little bit of luck to come your way. But maybe on the third attempt, some things just worked out. And what happened after that was, now suddenly, again, this thing that happened to me as a grandmaster, sort of a similar kind of mental situation. You become world champion, and then what do you do next? So I started to play some tournaments. My results were actually quite good in the beginning. I did very well in Holland. I won a tournament in Mexico, and things were looking good. Except I hadn't really been paying attention, but a lot of technical defects were starting to creep into my play. And I felt this in Holland. Very often I would play a good game, spoil it, but then my opponent would blunder back, and then I would win somehow. But as long as the results are good, you lack the sense of urgency in dealing with these problems. But I finally went to a tournament in Dortmund in that year in July, and this was simply the worst tournament of my life. In the first half, I lost 2 games, because basically these technical problems were now becoming quite pronounced. And I was not able to sort of pose any problems to any of my rivals. I could defend well and make a draw, or I could lose. But those were the only 2 things that were happening. So what happened was, in the second half of the tournament, I decided to cut my losses and just draw my way out of the tournament. To cut a long story short, it didn't work out that way. I lost 2 more games, which I think most of you will probably relate to from your own experience. When you're just trying not to do something badly, it'll often go even worse. And so after Dortmund, I then spent about 8 or 9 months in a severe crisis. I lost my title by the end of that year. And to make things worse, no matter what I did, then I started to deal with a lot of these issues that had been piling up. I started to experiment. I mean, even experiment sort of wildly, just to get, that confidence and that flow again. But it took me up till March the next year before I more or less, it's not that I gave up, but at some point your expectations and your results actually come into some sort of balance. When I went to a tournament, I was no longer that excited about winning or something. I just turned up and tried to do well. And at some point, you sort of get into a kind of balance. And this tournament was in Prague in April. And it was actually one of the strongest rapid tournaments ever held. So that was nice because it was a rapid tournament. And I remember arriving in Prague and actually finding it an incredibly beautiful city, and there were nice restaurants. And so me and my wife just decided to make a nice event out of it. And then finally I was able to relax at a tournament. And the chess went brilliantly. I won that tournament easily. I won it was a knockout tournament. And I won each match, it seemed almost effortlessly, and even won the final. So then I could sort of feel happy again because I felt that I had hit bottom and I was picking up again. But I think what you can see is that at some point you become very objective, very realistic, and you also enjoy yourself. And this combination is very nice to have. But it's very difficult to control it, but I achieved it simply by enduring 8 months of hardship, and then the cycle turned. After that, my results actually picked up for the next 3 or 4 years. In 2003 and 4, I was the best player in the world. I won most of the tournaments in those 2 years, and I got something called the Chess Oscar, which is a prize voted on by journalists, very similar to the film thing. And it was also a period where there was no world championship, so I didn't have to think about that a lot. And maybe that was a weight off my shoulders for a couple of years. But after 1 or 2 good years, inevitably you start to dream again. And in 2007, there was going to be a very big world championship in Mexico City. So that was scheduled in September 2007. 2006 was a very good year again, by the way. And then in 2007, in the first tournament of that year, I actually did well, but I lost 2 games with the black pieces. And despite the fact that I managed to salvage the tournament by winning some games towards the end, it was clear that in 2005 and 6, I'd almost not lost a game with black. And then suddenly, I'd lost 2 in 1 tournament. And I remembered what I told myself about addressing these technical problems early on. I mean, when you get some feedback, if you address it very quickly, then it's very helpful. The reason is, first of all, if you address each problem, then they don't accumulate. But more to the point, when they accumulate, then it becomes obvious to everyone that you're struggling. And then you not only have to deal with your own problems, but you have to deal with their confidence as well. So this time I panicked and sort of addressed these problems very quickly. I actually managed to win the second tournament I played that year. So 2007 went very well. I even became world number 1. But this happened by a funny combination of me doing well and the guy who was number 1 doing spectacularly badly. So I literally saw him on the way down. And then we went to the World Championship, and this one I won. I'd done very focused work, but I'd also taken some huge gambles. Essentially, I just completely neglected 1 or 2 areas and put all my eggs in another basket, and that's what happened. So a bit of a gamble, and it worked brilliantly. And when I won Mexico, then I would enter this phase of playing several matches. So I was going to play a match against Kramnik. I didn't know that then, but of course there would be subsequent matches. But at that point, I was scheduled to play a match against Vladimir Kramnik. Now, he's one of the most impressive match players, and he had beaten Kasparov in a match of 16 games. He had beaten him in 15. And what was even worse, in these 15 games, you couldn't point to a single game where Kasparov was better. I mean, you could really stretch your arguments to make some case that the 14th game he was better, but this is not really how you play matches. So the first thing for me was to avoid being sucked into this. The thing is, if Vladdy is in his own comfort zone, then he's almost invincible. And I had to find some way to, not allow him to get into his comfort zone. If I could describe it, I would say generally dry positions, where there's not a lot of tactics happening, but you can't take your eye off the board. You have to keep concentrating, and it's very difficult to do so in dry positions because they're not very interesting. It's much easier to concentrate fully when there's all sorts of things happening. But he's very good at this, at patiently waiting and exploiting any mistake. So it was clear that was the kind of position he was going to aim for. So the match was again scheduled for about October. And in October the previous year, I had to start taking some decisions about the match. So the first thing was what my repertoire would be and who my trainers would be. And I thought about it for a while, and I realized that the most important thing would be to take a decision very early. Essentially, I had a choice between moving with the king pawn or moving with the queen pawn. So if some of you are not very familiar with chess, let's just call them A and B. And the thing is, I didn't want to nurse these two alternatives along till April. Then I could take an informed decision based on the work I had done up till then. But having taken that decision, I would only have 5 months to do any work. So my idea was, again, to take a big gamble and choose, well, in the end I chose the queen's pawn, d4. And I chose that, and I decided that in October, and essentially kicked away the ladder. I took that decision, said, I'm not going to revisit it. Let's just stick with this. And that allows you to, once there's no way back, then you will deal with any situation that you have mentally. So it allowed me to get into this frame that this is what I'm going to play in the match, and this is what I've got to be ready for. It also gave a lot of clarity to my trainers because they knew what to focus on. And in fact, I took the decision in 5 minutes because there's no way of taking a better decision. There are pros and there are cons, and they're not going to change. So you just toss a coin, do something. I felt like doing something new, and that's what I did. I mean, before the match is happening, and without actually seeing what Kramnik had prepared, there's no way to tell whether I'm going to make the right decision or not, so you might as well just get on with it. That match also went brilliantly. Of course, I hadn't depended only on this choice with white. I'd also done some very interesting work with black. And the advantage was because I was working in completely new areas. In fact, d4 is Kramnik's territory. But because it would be unexpected for him, I felt that I would gain a lot in surprise value. And also, it's an interesting psychological thing. When you're confronted with your own weapons, you tend to assume that your opponent knows more than he does. So I felt that often Vladimir would give me the benefit of the doubt because he himself would know what's wrong with a certain move, and he wouldn't play it because he wouldn't know that I might not be so au fait with this whole thing. And the match went spectacularly well. I still think it's the best match I've played so far in my life. I also think this is a heavy dose of luck. I mean, my opponent walked into a big ambush, and that's not going to happen every time. And in fact, it hasn't. So in my subsequent matches against Topalov and Gelfand, I had this problem that, in effect, I had shown my best cards. So you could see in their approach, first Topalov, he was incredibly cautious in the things he allowed me to do and not to do. And you could see that in the same way that I tried very hard not to become Kasparov against Kramnik, he was trying very hard not to become Kramnik against me. So there were just some clear, and this is something you'll just have to live with. There's only so many big surprises you can pull. So by the second match, I more or less mentally thought it's going to be some sort of war of attrition. You'll just have to keep playing and patiently waiting for your chance because these huge spectacular ambushes are not going to happen. I mean, my opponents are much more wary nowadays. With Topalov, of course, there was also a lot of psychological warfare going on. His first thing was not to talk to me during the game. It's not that we chit-chat, but you're supposed to be able to offer a draw, and his thing was, I'm not going to offer you a draw. We're going to play till the rules force us to make a draw. Essentially, he was saying that he would also not only not offer a one, but he would never accept a draw. So there was never going to be any conversation between us, which was fine by me because it actually freed me up in a certain way. The thing is, sometimes I'm quite, if my opponent offers me a draw, then I have to think of all the implications of accepting or not accepting. But again, if my opponent is never going to offer a draw, then it gives you some clarity. And I found this very helpful. So in game theoretical sense, I would say that he made a big mistake. What he should have done was not announce that he was never going to offer a draw, but simply never offer a draw. It has the same effect, but very often during the game, you'll in a bad position or in a position where you're not happy with yourself, you'll start wondering, is there going to be a draw offer coming? And every little bit counts. And these sort of thoughts in your head can be unhelpful. And I didn't see any advantage for him for declaring his cards that openly, except that he seemed to think that this kind of psychological warfare would affect my play. Now, this sort of thing had affected me in the past. I mean, I once played Kasparov in a match where we had 8 draws, and then I won the 9th game. And then in the 10th game, he played a spectacular new idea, at least by the standards of those days. And it was clear to me that it was going to be very difficult to come back. But then what he started doing is after every move, he'd make a move, get up, go, slam the door, and walk out, and in a loud way so that the whole cube would rattle. So the thing was, we were playing in the 107th floor in the World Trade Center, and they had some fire regulations, which meant we couldn't enclose any space. So they installed a cube which somehow magically didn't violate these fire regulations. And that's the one we were playing in. But because the thing is, every time the door is slammed, the whole cube rattles. And this was just outrageous behavior, and I wanted to protest. And I wanted to just tell the arbiter, well, he should stop this. But then I thought, if I'm probably going to lose this game anyway, so if I protest, I'll just look like a bad loser. And I kind of rationalized that I shouldn't protest this game. I should wait for a better chance or something like that. Which, in one sense, is correct, but in another sense is just chicken. I should have protested. I regret it still. I should have protested. Even if you're going to lose the game, you should protest simply to make the point that your opponent is behaving outrageously. And come what may. But you have to establish the psychological space that there are some barriers you cannot cross. Because inevitably, this will feed into your chess as well. So I thought it was very important to think. But at that point, I made the wrong decision. And in fact, I struggled in the next 3 or 4 games in the match. And it was clear that my nerves had somehow become rattled. But as they say, even a donkey won't hit the same stone twice. So in this match, when Topalov started doing all this stuff, then I felt much better. And this time, there was nothing really to protest. You can't protest that your opponent isn't talking to you. But then we look like lovers. But but I decided that I would just wait for my chances. And I converted the fact that he was never going to offer a draw into an incentive for me, which meant that I never needed to get by a big opening advantage. I knew that because we would keep on playing, chances would continually arise. And therefore, it kind of motivated me to stay alert. So in this sense, this way, the second time I'd learned that you can't just ignore these things. You have to convert it into something that is positive for you. And even so, it was a very tight match all the way till the 11th game. And it was only the 12th game that it ended. It ended because he took some insane risks in the last game, trying to win. And it later on turned out that he thought that his chances were hopeless in the rapid games, because I'm a very good rapid player. So he tried to force matters very early. But that is never the full explanation. So in chess, your decisions at the board are never purely technical. They're also psychological. And essentially what was happening to him was that his nerves were giving way. He couldn't take the tension of just waiting. He couldn't take this tension of just waiting anymore, and he tried to force matters. In the same way that I was psychologically not confronting Kasparov, while I'm pretending to myself that there is some logic in my not confronting him. So in the end, what separated us was a bit of nerves, but that's what mattered. And then recently, I had a match with Gelfand. And of course, with Gelfand, I must say, well, we both have children more or less the same age. He has a son of 15 months and a couple of weeks. I have a son 15 months. And we were both at the same tournament when his son was born, and so on. So, and we were very close friends for many, many years. So it was clear there was never going to be this level of antipathy. But it was still important to remember that two guys dreaming of beating each other, and you can't let this friendship thing go too far. So with Boris, I knew and always expected complete fair play. That was clear to me from the get-go. But my main thing was still to find a way to be aggressive and force matters. Unfortunately, he had also done some technically good work before the match. And it seemed almost designed to neutralize any chances for me to get my favorite kind of positions. Or if I aim for them, to get them under unfavorable conditions. That is, always he would come up with some sort of surprise. And at the board, I would have to think, if I want to do the stuff I like to do, I'm going to have to play something that I've looked at for 2 days against something that he and his team have looked at for maybe 2 weeks. And so there was always going to be that imbalance. So I also had to play slightly differently from the way I'd expected. And it was only in the 7th and 8th games that this routine sort of broke. And there is no real reason why it broke in those games, except that it did. Sometimes in a match, you're both playing very well, and then one person slips up, and then the very next day, the other person, it seems that a defeat can affect you, but a win can affect you as well. So after the 8th game, again, this war of attrition continued till the 12th game. But by this point, we had managed to find some nice new ideas, which would help in the tie breaks. And I was starting to feel a bit better about the fact that it was rapid chess. Not that I thought I would be a huge favorite, because I actually believe that when the stakes are that high, it's not your skill in rapid chess which counts, it's your skill in holding your nerves. So when you're playing with that kind of tension, you shouldn't expect your hands to work at the same way they do when there's not that much pressure. Anyway, I finally won this match, but I drew the first game after being in a better position. I won the second after many things happened. Then the third and fourth, again, many things happened. The third, I probably should have lost. But somehow at the end of the day, I hung in there. And this is the other thing that I think is very important. Sometimes, even if nothing seems to be working, it's very important to at least keep hanging in there and wait for your chance, because there will still be one. Whereas if you precipitate matters, it's again what I mentioned earlier, a sign of nervousness, but you're giving away something. So even though this match, I was not able to really get my chances, I outweighted him. And that's pretty much up to May this year. So thank you very much. I hope you got a good